Hey there Internet, and welcome to yet another end of the year favorite books video. Every year I've done one of these, I've done it a little bit differently. Some years I just did a straight up top 10 list, other years I've broken it down between my favorite series books and my favorite standalones. Some years I've limited it to only books that came out that year. This year I'm doing it differently yet again. I went through my Goodreads list, looked at all of the books I've read this year, and just decided to pick a few that have continued to stay with me long after I finished reading them. Not all of these were necessarily 5-star books, but something about the stories continues to resonate with me as the year comes to a close. So in light of 2016 being just around the corner, here are the top 6 books that I read in 2015. One book that I was particularly happy to read all the way back in January was Royal Wedding by Meg Cabot. This book has some sentimental value. I grew up with Mia Thermopolis. I was the right age when I read her as a teenager, and now as a 26-year-old character to a 27-year-old reader, it was so refreshing. It was like meeting up with an old friend, and the stuff that Mia goes through in this book, none of my friends were marrying royals or are royalty, but those kinds of growing pains, and I felt like Meg Cabot perfectly captured this time in my life, and to get to go through that with a character that knew me when, and I knew her when, it was just adorable and delectable and delightful. And I love alliterations, and they're perfectly suited for this story. Another series that I completely adored that came to an end this year was the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. I loved Cinder when I first read it a few years ago, then Scarlet, then Cress, and then Winter finally came out this month. And it was such a satisfying conclusion to what has been a really just enjoyable series. This science fiction retelling of fairy tales is engaging and exciting, and it had twists and turns. Some that I saw coming, some of them completely took me by surprise. There are princesses and rogue pilots and emperors and evil queens, and it's just a book series that I will continue to curl up with and just thoroughly enjoy in the years to come. And I love sharing it with people. I feel like this series has a strong community of readers, and I'm glad to be a part of it. A book that plenty of people read last year, but it got a lot of buzz this year because of its movie adaptation, was The Martian by Andy Weir. I read this as part of a book club that I do with my students at school, and we were all completely engaged in this story. Teenagers and adults alike, I feel, have been able to gravitate toward the story of a man stuck on another planet and all of the people working to try to bring him home once they realize that he is indeed alive and stuck on this other planet. It was sarcastic, and there was adventure, and there was science in the science fiction, but it wasn't overwhelming. I didn't understand all of it, but I was able to grasp it. I was able to hang on with both hands to this really exciting tale. I thought the movie did a great job capturing the biggest parts of this book, and it's just something that I think even the most reluctant readers have even said, yeah, that's cool, I'll read that. So this was a book that I just keep thinking about, and I couldn't put it down. It was an absolute page-turner. Another book I read this year that I wasn't expecting to be a page-turner considering its content was Challenger Deep by Neal Shusterman. This actually just won the National Book Award for Youth, and I think it was a completely deserving choice. This is a book that chronicles the story of a boy who has paranoid schizophrenia, and it gets inside his mind. And the thing about this story that is even more touching, as if that topic isn't a big enough challenge in and of itself, is that the author wrote this book because of his son. His son has paranoid schizophrenia and actually provided the illustrations that appear throughout this book. Pictures that he drew while he was going through this, and it's an amazing tale to see from that perspective and to get inside that person's head, and it's done so well. And the author captures things like depression and adolescence and figuring out these normal things that everyone goes through, and then on top of that, not being able to trust your own mind. And I thought it was beautifully written. I wanted so desperately to make sure that the protagonist was going to be okay, that things got figured out. And it's just such a moving tale, one of the best books I've ever encountered. on mental health. Also touching on mental health was If You Find This Letter by Hannah Brencher. It's talking not just about mental health, but spiritual health and how people interact with each other. This is the memoir of a girl who moved to New York City after college just wanting to change the world, and even though she's surrounded by millions of people, she's completely lonely. And it isn't until she starts writing letters to people anonymously and just leaving them around that she starts to feel better. And thus a movement was born. There are now clubs at schools and in communities around the country dedicated to people writing letters anonymously or non-anonymously to people who just need them. This is a tale of connectedness, of finding your way and finding your place even when it feels like there's no one there. Yes, Hannah does talk a lot about her relationship with God, and it's not at all preachy, which, as someone who has a similar belief system, I found that refreshing. Reading this book was like reading the blog post of an old friend, and it just picked me up. My students have loved this book too. I think it's great for teens and adults, and it was just a case of reading the right book at the right time in my life, and I really, really loved it. And lastly, but not least, was All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. I read this as part of a summer book club with teachers, and even though this book is about 500 pages or so, it's a book that I read quickly and I just keep thinking about months later. It's a story about World War II, focusing on two children who could not have been more different. One girl is blind and living in France with her father. The other is Boy, who is a genius among the Nazis because he's a bit of a prodigy when it comes to figuring out radios. And there's all these other people in between, and their lives are intertwined in this strange, beautiful, bizarre way, especially considering the circumstances of war. It's so deep, and I just couldn't stop needing to know about these characters. There's a lot of short chapters, so despite the fact that it's a big book, it was also a very quick read. But this is a book that makes me think about people, how we have our own worlds and our own communities, and how they're affected by the world at large, and how the world at large is affected by these small communities. It was a very tightly woven, intricate tapestry of a story, and I am still thinking about it months later. So I read a heck of a lot of books in 2015. I would love to know what you guys have all read this year. What were your top books? What were your favorites? All of my usual links are down below. Comments are always welcome. I'm wishing all of you a very happy and healthy new year, and that's it for me for now. Take care. Bye! I am currently reading Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo and The Cuckoo's Calling by Robert Galbraith. And if you like what you've seen here today, please like and please subscribe for more.